Hi and welcome to Uncle Scott's Kitchen. In this video I'm going to show you step by step how to make a delicious chickpea soup based on a simple Italian recipe from Tuscany, which we're presumptively going to improve quite a bit. Zuppa di ceci, as the Italians might say. Full of healthy ingredients, we'll blend it to make it thick and hearty, and then we'll make some garlic and rosemary infused olive oil to really finish it with a blast of fresh flavor right before serving. When it's bone chilling outside, when it's time for a soup day, a bowl of this delicious Italian chickpea soup will warm you right up. Absolutely delicious. Here's how to make it. Ingredients and equipment. Let's start with all the stuff we need. For ingredients, we'll need some good olive oil, butter, chicken stock, tomato paste, carrots, onions, and celery, salt and pepper, of course, and if you want to get really crazy, a bay leaf or two. And for that flavor-infused oil, a few cloves of garlic and some fresh rosemary to finish the soup. And of course, the stars of the show here are the chickpeas. I'm going to use 1 pound of dried chickpeas and kind of cook them in the classical old school way using a pressure cooker. I'll show how to prepare those here in a minute. But if you want to use good quality canned chickpeas for convenience, that's okay. Your soup will be delicious either way. The ingredient amounts in the video are for 1 pound of dried or 3 to 4 cans of pre-cooked chickpeas. Now we focus a lot on equipment around here, and when I watch other cooking videos, I always like to know exactly what they are using, so here's what I use. I'm using a Fissler old school pressure cooker to prepare my dried chickpeas. Then I use an enameled cast iron Dutch oven to make the soup. It actually helps to have 2 of these if you can swing it, as some ingredients kind of go back and forth. And I'm compiling video for making this soup a bunch of times, so you might see Lodge, Tramontina, or Martha Stewart, yes, Martha Stewart Dutch ovens pop up from time to time. You know, I asked for a Le Creuset Dutch oven for Christmas, but Santa brought me the Martha Stewart instead. I have to say though, lack of brand snootiness aside, the lid fits tightly and it's worked pretty well so far. And I'm going to use some various Maviol coppers, a fancy Kramer knife. I'll put links for specific items I use in the video below if you want to check them out for yourself. Now for the recipe. How do you make the soup? First, let's prepare the dried beans. If you use canned chickpeas, feel free to skip ahead. I've got an entire video on how to prepare dried beans that I'm going to link to below, but at a high level, there are 3 main options here. You can brine and soak the beans overnight in salt water and then cook them. You can quick soak them in boiling water for a few minutes, then leave them covered for an hour and then cook them. Or what I do is use a pressure cooker. This one a big Fissler. I can go from dried beans to finished soup in about an hour, which is really nice. I sort and inspect my dried beans first. I note that I've never actually found anything but dried beans when I do this. Still looking for that gold nugget. Give those a good rinse. Then I fill my cooker 1/3 full with water. In go the beans. Make sure the top is sealed. Set this on a high flame. Then I stand back and wait for the explosion. I kid. So I bring this up to pressure and cook the beans at pressure for about 25 minutes. Then I let them cool another 10 minutes or so before releasing the pressure. I find that this cooking time gets the beans almost, but not completely done. I let them finish up cooking in the soup. And here, using a pressure cooker, the timing works out well because in the meantime, while those beans are cooking, I can prepare everything else and get the soup going and simply add the beans at the end when they are done. I mentioned earlier that the base recipe comes from Italy, in fact from this cookbook, La Cucina Toscana, the Tuscan Kitchen, which I picked up in a bookstore in Florence about a decade ago. Fantastic cookbook, great food photography, written in Italian and currently out of print. I recommend it if you do run across it though. The book has a section on soups and I started making the zuppa di ceci. Now, one of the hallmarks of Italian cooking, as opposed to French, is a focus on simplicity rather than intricacy. Italians often like to allow simple, fresh ingredients to really shine through in their dishes. Here, however, I thought that maybe the original soup recipe was a little too simple. It calls for making the soup by boiling the chickpeas in just plain water with only a little salt and a couple of bay leaves. And that was it for the entire soup. No flavor base at all, just water and bay leaves. So I set off to improve it. I started adding some peppercorns and onion when I cooked my beans and got a little more flavor, but even then, I found that when I blended the soup at the end, it almost took on the effect of a thin hummus rather than a big, full soup. So I continued to soup up my soup, as it were, and I found that making 3 specific changes really improves the recipe. First, I added a flavor base at the beginning using another Italian technique of starting with a small sofrito. Second, I added a little tomato paste, just enough for a hint of flavor, but really more importantly for a little bit of color. And third, I substituted some chicken stock for half of the water. Now, I also want to be careful here not to go too far. If you use all chicken stock, if you were to add a whole can of tomatoes, or start with a bigger sofrito with big chunky vegetables, you could almost end up with a chicken or veggie soup with chickpeas rather than a chickpea soup with a flavor base. So don't go too far with these. So while those chickpeas are cooking, I start my sofrito. This may be the most important step in this soup. If you can master making a good sofrito, a whole world of cooking possibilities opens up to you. It's the base of many dishes, not only soups, but big dishes like ragu, bolognese, on and on. Now, since I just want a flavor base, I'm going to make a small sofrito here. I'm only using 1 carrot, 1 stalk of celery, and 1 onion. Now, these days when people say 1 onion, it's hard to know whether they mean a normal onion or a mutant GMO bagged onion from one of the big box stores. So a little trick I like to do is start with the carrot and celery first, and then dice up just enough onion to match those. Of course, I wash everything and peel the carrots. For the celery, I use just the best parts of the stalk and trim away some of the tough strands as well. As for dice size, I tend to be slow and meticulous. My wife says annoying, but really there's no need to obsess over perfection here as we're making a soup that's going to be blended. 1/4 inch or so cubes. You want relatively uniform cubes so they cook evenly, but again, perfection isn't necessary as they are not going to be seen in the final dish. Set your heavy bottom Dutch oven on a low or at most medium-low flame, a fuoco basso as they say, and add your oil and or butter. Now in northern Italy, you might run across a sofrito made with only butter. In the south, it might be all olive oil. In Utah, where I live, which is nowhere near Italy, I like 2 tablespoons of each. When the butter is melted, add the veggies and a teaspoon of salt. And here, the key is patience. Low and slow is the way to go. I do not want any browning at all, none whatsoever. I set the heat so that I can barely hear the veggies sizzling, and I sweat them and softly, gently, barely fry them for 15 to 20 minutes. You really ought to taste them every few minutes and note how they go from crunchy and earthy to soft and buttery and almost sweet, kind of like me. When the taste and texture seem like something you'd like to eat in a soup rather than a salad, you're ready for the tomato paste. I only use a tablespoon or so of good tomato paste. I add that, get everything coated, and let it cook a minute or 2. This adds just a hint of tomato flavor, and importantly also adds a hint of color, because let's face it, simple blended chickpeas are kind of like the drab khaki pants of the soup world. And since we're making a mess and doing dishes anyway, I also like to get a 3rd pot going and gently heat my liquids. Here I'm starting 3 cups each of chicken stock and water. Let's check in on the chickpeas and see how they're coming along. I'm going to release the steam and open the pressure cooker, and there they are, ready to go in just a little over a half hour. Now we need to get everything combined into 1 pot and turn this into soup. If you're going to use the pressure cooker as your soup pot, you need to drain away the bean cooking water. If you're going to move the beans to another pot where you've made the sofrito, like I'm doing here, you can just use a spider and drain them as you go. So pick your pot and add your beans. Now add enough of that heated chicken broth water mixture to cover them nicely. I throw in a couple of bay leaves here as well. And I bring this up to a boil, then reduce it to a low simmer and let it cook another 15 minutes or so. We're just bringing the flavors together now, and if you did use dried chickpeas, if they need a few more minutes of cooking, this allows you to finish those up and make sure they are fully done and at the texture that you want. Now we are not done yet. While the soup is simmering, let's make that flavor-blasted finishing oil. So take a small frying pan, I'm using a fancy 8-inch Maviel copper here, and heat a ½ cup or so of olive oil on medium-low. A good place to start is with 3 cloves of garlic, smashed and chopped, and 1 sprig of rosemary, leaves removed and chopped. Add your chopped garlic and rosemary and let it gently fry. Now I like a ton of garlic and rosemary flavor, so I use a lot more. Not everyone does though, so be judicious at first until you get it dialed in for your flavor preference. Now here you want to watch it like a hawk. We want to infuse the oil with flavor here, but we want to be very careful not to brown the garlic. Brown garlic can be bitter and we don't want that. So really keep an eye on it. After a minute or 2, or when you see the very first hints of the garlic browning, set a strainer over a bowl and pour the mixture through to remove the solids. I also like to mash the mixture with a wooden spoon just to get a little more flavor out. And now you should have a bowl of beautiful flavored olive oil ready to go. Now let's finish the soup. First, remove the bay leaves. Now take your spider and remove a good scoop, maybe 1/4 of the chickpeas, and set those aside in a bowl. Now to your soup, add a good tablespoon of that olive oil mixture. Then take a handheld immersion blender. The one I'm using here is a Cuisinart, and blend, blend, blend. Magically, the soup goes from this, which is kind of okay, but really kind of watery and not great looking, to this, which is thick and hearty and rich and beautiful. And you don't even need to use any thickening agents. Now, if you don't have a handheld blender, you can use a food mill or a pasta verdura, as they say in Italiano. Now is a great time to taste the soup, adjust it for salt and pepper. When you're happy with it, add back the reserved chickpeas so there are a few whole ones in the final soup. It is a chickpea soup after all. We really do want to see a few in there. Now let's plate it or bowl it, as it were. So ladle your soup into a nice bowl. Take 1 more spoonful of that infused oil and drizzle it on top. And bonus points here if you add a little sprig of rosemary to really fancy it up. Some nice homemade bread goes along with it really well too. And there it is, thick, hearty, delicious chickpea soup. We've taken a classic Italian chickpea soup recipe and made it even better. And we've made one of the best soups you'll ever taste on a cold winter day. Try it and let me know what you think. Make sure you check out the links below for more information and a list of the equipment we've used. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time on Uncle Scott's Kitchen.